Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Alan Katz. He is a Hollywood veteran and an award winning podcaster. Welcome to the show, Alan.
Thank you, AJ. It is a real pleasure to meet you and a pleasure to be here and to have a chance to talk to your audience.
Absolutely. You are welcome. You are welcome to the show, Alan. You are welcome to India in this online form. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we are going to talk right now. We'll learn from you about how one can master storytelling to transform their career. And we'll talk much more beyond this filter. But before that, let's understand a bit more about your journey, your background, Alan, so that people know who they are listening to.
The bulk of my career has been spent in movies and TV. In particular, probably the most well-known thing that I did, I wrote and produced a show for HBO called Tales From The Crypt. And as part of working on Tales From The Crypt, I co-created their host, a character named the Crypt Keeper. And I wrote every single word that the Crypt Keeper was a puppet, but in essence, I created his character, his personality. While we were doing Tales from the Crypt, we also did a couple of feature films. We did a very successful feature film called Demon Knight. And then I'll put it this way, doing Tales from the Crypt and I did that show about 30 years ago. Everyone who worked on that show, as they look back at the show in retrospect at their careers, everyone agrees that doing Tales from the Crypt was one of the most satisfying creative experiences of all of our lives because of the freedom that we had and the respect that we all had in that particular working environment. It was just a great storytelling experience. The second Tales from the Crypt feature film that we did was a thing called Bordello of Blood that was the antithesis of the successful storytelling experience. We made a movie for all the wrong reasons, and actually none of us wanted to make the movie, and it was incredibly impactful. Working on something you really don't want to do, it is remarkable how impactful it is on your career in life. And it derailed my career in life for the better part of 2 decades. And it took significant work to put my story back on track. And in essence, that's where podcasting has come in. I find podcasting the most exciting storytelling medium there is because of its incredible intimacy. And I'm delighted to say that my storytelling path led me at the end of the day to podcasting, and I think podcasting is the most amazing storytelling medium of all.
Absolutely. Alan will come to that. But first, I want to understand better, even at the cost of repeating some of the things that you've said, is how did this transition to podcasting happen? And then we'll get to the storytelling part.
Right in the past couple of years, the film and TV business in the United States, I cannot speak for the film and TV business where you are. It could be healthier than it is in the United States, but the film and TV business here is in a terrible state. The streaming wars were especially devastating to the creative community at the end of the day. They were great at first, but the economics of streaming really hurt the business as a whole. To take an idea from my head out into the world, there are thousands of people standing in the way of any creative project that you want to do. And at any one point, any one of those people can kill your project dead simply because They don't understand it. They're disagreeable. The thing about podcasting is there's only one person ever standing in my way, and it's me. And so long as I'm willing to do the work, all right, I got to find my own audience, or I got to help my audience find the project that I've worked on or I'm working on. But I'm quite willing to take that responsibility. Podcasting, when people listen to a podcast, when people listen to us, they usually it's with earbuds or earphones, and they take our voices and our stories and they put them between their ears, right inside their heads. And the intimacy of that storytelling, I find incredibly appealing. I've written for the big screen. I've written for the little screen. I've written for computer games. I've written for all kinds of storytelling environments. But it's the peer-to-peer nature of podcasting, and that the very, very real sense of you and the audience, that one-on-one. I love the intimacy of that kind of storytelling. And so
Absolutely.
I feel incredibly at home here. I feel like it occurred to me that I suddenly discovered the thing that I wanted to be when I grew up as a professional, as a storyteller, and it's a podcaster.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, when you talk of storytelling, Alan, how should we look at storytelling? Is it about our own story, or is it about someone else's story?
The first a key is you have to be able to tell your own story first. If you cannot tell your own story, how do you how do how do you expect to tell anybody else's story? Now, I know this from experience because I kept a secret from myself for 45 years. I did. There's something terrible happened to me when I was 14, and for 45 years, I kept it a secret. And I would say that over the course of most of my Hollywood career as a very successful writer of TV, writer producer of movies and TV shows, I was a terrific writer. But it wasn't until I went through a 2 decades long writer's block and depression, and I got lucky and I bounced, and I confronted the secret that I've been keeping from myself. And once I dealt with that, it was quite liberating. Hey, the truth will set you free. And I suddenly found that because I could suddenly tell my own story to me, I could tell my story to everybody else. And once I could tell my story, I could tell anybody else's story. And I went from being, I think, all right, a very good writer to being a storyteller. And that is a thing I am truly proud of being.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Alan. So, is storytelling dependent on the medium? Earlier, it used to be people used to tell verbally. Now you say that podcasting is one of the most intimate mediums. Between that, there were books, there were television shows, there were movies, and hundreds of other things. How do you see this part, storytelling versus the medium?
Every medium offers the storyteller a set of tools that are unique to that medium. With podcasting, every last bit of sound is available to us to create the soundscape in which our stories take place. And it's literal sound effects, music. We also have available to us sound editing. I do, gosh, I've got 5 podcasts that are happening right now. I've got another 5 podcasts in various stages of pre-production. But each podcast, depending upon the subject matter, they all get treated, I guess they all pass through the same storytelling lens on their way out into the world. I, as much as possible, I like to produce my podcasts. I like to, yes, there's the storytelling aspect, but I love to layer in as much sound as I can to when appropriate, to create a feeling of the sound environment in which the story is taking place. Music is a wonderful component because you don't want to beat the audience over the head, but you can layer in the emotional underpinnings of a scene through the music, and that's one of the things that I have no musical talent whatsoever, but I'm pretty good at choosing music to go underneath a scene because what you're looking for is the emotional pulse, but you're also looking for, you want to move the story forward, a little bit of propulsion too. Uh, so what podcasting, because it's radio, it's one-on-one radio. Whatever all those lovely means of between, like I said, creating the sound, but also editing the sound. On my podcast, I do a great deal of dialogue editing because I really want people to sound the best they possibly can. When I do interviews, people certainly in America are guilty of many vocal tics. Or I try to excise as much of that as possible to make people sound as articulate as possible. It also makes the conversation flow better without all the pauses and ticks. But hey, sometimes you can actually control the drama of what someone said by timing a pause, adding a pause where there wasn't one. Suddenly, something where they were just rushing forward, talking becomes a little more thoughtful simply because you added a pause.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And
So,
so,
Ellen,
yeah, the
yeah,
story medium, it's so filled with potential. Gosh, AJ, how can we not love it?
absolutely. How can we not love it? But in terms of storytelling and career, boosting one's career, should everyone become a podcaster then? Do you need to become a podcaster to blare your story out? How do I tell my story to the people who matter in terms of my career? Some people say, fake till you make it. Fake it till you make it. Is that storytelling? A lot of our leaders do that in corporate world also, and they can tell this is my story. Then later on, you come to know that that story was false. People say I have pivoted, from that particular thing and created another story. That's almost like advertising, and so many. Help us understand this whole gamut of creating, telling my own story, especially in terms of my career.
Authenticity is really important. And lack of authenticity will often catch up with you at some point, regardless of what your career is. You will, yeah, phonies will get caught out eventually. They will trip up on their own phoniness. So, where one's story is concerned, or we'll come to the podcasting part second, knowing how to tell your story, knowing how to appreciate what your story's significance to other people, what your story can teach them, is important to know from a career standpoint. Yes, what can your story contribute to other people's stories? And that's kind of how you have to see yourself. Your story is conjoined with other people's stories, and you certainly want your story to make other people's stories better as much as you want their stories to make your story better. So the key is, as best you possibly can, know your own story. Oh, even better if you can know the value of your own story. That's super helpful. Where podcasting is concerned, I've come to learn over the course of my the 4 or 5 years that I've been into podcasting now. Well, first of all, I've met so many people since I started podcasting. So many people, and almost every one of them is wonderful. And every last one of them has a story. And if you have a story, well, then you've got a podcast in you. Some people have more than one podcast. Some people have multiple podcasts in them, but everyone has at least one podcastable story in them. And so in that sense, yeah, everybody, the great thing about podcasting as a storytelling medium is that pretty much anyone can do it. It's not technologically hard all by itself. If you can record and upload and find a podcasting host, spend a couple pennies, you don't even have to do that. You can pretty much do it. You can put your story out into the world. And that all by itself is a very important step. If you want to find an audience for your story, that's a whole other. Creating content and marketing content are two very different things, and they both take an incredible amount of time. The first thing you have to worry about is creating great content, and great content starts with your own story and your ability to convey it effectively, economically, compellingly.
Right, right, Alan. What about that? My storytelling becomes, as a podcaster, especially, or even in any other medium, if you talk about either newspapers, even on movies and on, my storytelling is not storytelling, but someone else's narrative in the name of storytelling. How would you look at that? Am I doing justice? For example, there is this whole lot of research came in that a lot of podcasters were, you know, only telling one part of the recent elections that happened in the US. And people may have, I don't have any particular view, neither I'm a US citizen, but I have read about it. I want to understand, was that storytelling when you are telling some narrative or being a part of a narrative, and people you are not disclosing it in any manner, and people are now wanting to know much more about it, and the White House press room has been open to much more people. So I don't know, I'm happy about this that has happened, but I'm trying to understand what it all means in terms of storytelling, storytellers, and in terms of narrating a narrative for someone else.
Interestingly, I think America in this last election just got revealed. Our story is not what we've been telling ourselves or the world. We actually are, we're not the hero that we've been telling the world that we are. That actually was a story that we made up, oddly enough. An awful lot of the American narrative is actually an invented story. Americans are incredibly good at making up stories about ourselves and then believing it. And the biggest story we told about ourselves is that we're this home of the land of the free, the home of the brave. We're quite something else entirely. There's a very dark streak inside of us, and it has always been there. That is part of our story. But sometimes, as we know from experience, we aren't necessarily our best storytellers. Sometimes, often other people, because they have perspective that we don't have, are better storytellers, are better tellers of our story than we are. We can tell you what it was like emotionally to be there. We don't necessarily appreciate what it all means, or who we really are. We're a little too close to understand that for real. And that's true with us as people. But it was there's that ancient curse, may you live in interesting times. Yes, we are cursed to live in interesting times. That's our problem.
Right.
Too much
Interesting
story
times.
narrative
But
for one time.
interesting times. But are these good times or not so good times in terms of storytelling?
Oh, fantastic times for storytellers. Holy, you couldn't make this up. You could not make up what's happening all across this globe and get away with it. It's holy cow. A character like Elon Musk, he's a Bond villain. He's a literal Bond villain come to life, walking around our planet doing things. If he wasn't walking around doing it, and you tried to write a character like him, you'd say no. It's just not plausible. No. How could one person have this much control of of the planet? It doesn't make sense. Well, there it is. There it is, and it still doesn't make any damn sense. But that's the story we're all living in. So it's an amazing time for storytellers. Our only problem is that as those of us who write some fiction occasionally, we can't compete. Reality is just too bonkers.
Right. So whenever any good storytelling medium comes in, Alan, it's like it becomes like sugar, and ants keep on crawling towards it, trying to make the best of it. Either people with bags of money or people with whatever name. And even in podcasting, politicians throng towards it, celebrities throng towards it, even businesses came into it and have been, but most of them have been, pushed out by whatever reasons. How do you see this part of storytelling, the common person, the common storyteller, imposters, pretenders to the throne, and people who are ants looking for much more sugar into any industry that they see? How do you see storytelling and stories into this getting impacted by all this? Do you think it will survive, it will thrive, or it is going to die? Because already you see video podcasting and audio podcasting, there's a lot of debate right now.
Hard to forecast what will come of this all. For the moment, podcasting is incredibly democratic. Yeah, there are corporate players, but there are all kinds of podcasts to play to small audiences, and you can create a community with a podcast. Is anyone going to get rich? No. Don't do that. Don't do this for that reason. You might be able to support yourself, or it can pay for itself. It depends. At the end of the day, where podcasting is concerned, it all comes down to content. If enough people want your content, then yeah, you can probably make a little bit of money. And if more and more people want your content, but first and foremost, make great content. Tell an honest story. The more authentic you are when you get on mic as a podcaster, first and foremost, it's important to see this thing here, the microphone, not as a piece of equipment, but as an extension of your vocal cords. I think of it as the ear of a lover. And I would never shout at it. I would never shout into it. I'm very gentle with it. It. And if you approach the microphone in that way, your ability to storytell becomes more heartfelt. And that's, nobody can guarantee anybody's success on anything. But the one thing you can do to help yourself is to create great content, is to be as authentic and honest as you possibly can be. And the remarkable thing is, people really respond well to authenticity, and they hear it in the voice. as a TV movie, as a TV writer and producer, TV and feature film writer and producer, I hired lots and lots and lots of actors. But I can tell you, in all honesty, I never ever hired an actor to act, because the acting, if actors go to working in a theater, yeah, they have to act so people in the back row can see and hear them. But the camera changes that equation, and the camera is right there next to them, and it sees, and the microphones hear everything, but the camera sees everything. And if actors try to act, the camera will see it, and we'll have to cut all that out. It'll end up on the floor. I always hired actors to be as honestly as honest about their emotions as they possibly can be. I give them a different name, and we write words for them to say, but their job really is to be as authentic in their emotional reactions, moment to moment. And that's what the audience is really going to be reacting to. The microphone, our microphone here in the podcast, is exactly the same thing. It really does hear our falsity. If we dare to disrespect the microphone and lie into it, it'll hear it. You don't want to do that. So everything starts with that honesty. And if you can do that, all right, then the stories can have greater value to more and more people. And yeah, it takes a little bit of savvy, but also help. It's good. You need to have help, people who understand the mission that you're on and why it's important to help you tell your stories. And so if they're willing to help you get the stories out into the world, well, there you are. It is a process. You have to be patient. One of the tricks to success is perseverance. Being in the right place at the right time invariably involved being in the right place at the wrong time up until that moment. Where everyone's looking at you thinking, "Now, why are you standing there? What an idiot." And then suddenly it's the right moment, and you go from being an idiot to being a genius. Well,
absolutely. That's all of the fate that comes in here, and the biggest storyteller is the one who is writing our stories, and we don't know about it. We have to sometimes realize it. That is where the purpose comes in. But let's talk about storytelling, the future of storytelling. We talked about the players, narratives. How do you see AI and all? Do you think the future of as a filmmaker, someone who has been close to Hollywood, someone who is very close to podcasting, do you think the future will be determined by artificial intelligence from Sora, by Sora, or from so many of those likes, or by so many AI tools coming in? Because bit by bit we seem to be losing that whole edge about thinking independently in the name of either taking care of the writer's block, or even not trying to staring at the blank page and all that.
AI can be a fantastic tool. I've used it in my podcasting storytelling when I need to create a scene with one or two other voices. I can't afford to hire an actor, but I can act it myself and then create a new voice. And gosh, as a tool, that's fantastic. I have to tell everyone that, all right, I think we need to be honest when we're using AI in what we're doing. But as a tool, it's fantastic. Is it a threat to us all? Holy cow, yes. I didn't hire two actors. I used AI. So yes, it is. But I probably wouldn't have hired the actors anyway because I couldn't afford to. I would have been less creative in that moment. So in that instance, the AI gave me additional creative choices. The fear that AI will take over storytelling Well, AI can do an awful lot of what we do purely by being imitative, because so much storytelling is already imitative. What AI will all right, I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I could well be proven wrong, but I'll go out on the limb. What I don't think will ever be able to do where things like storytelling is concerned is innovate. And it will never ever be able to get inside human experience. It can imitate our descriptions of what we have experienced, but it can't ever have those experiences. AI will never be from a mother born. It will never have a human mother. And never having a human mother, it is not having a range of experiences and emotions. It's it's not being either screwed up or all the different ways that having a mother, just being born from a human being, what that does to our experience and the ways that we describe them, our word choices and the stories that we tell. So another thing that AI cannot do is laugh at itself. AI can make jokes, but AI has no sense of humor. If, in my mind, what do I mean by having a sense of humor? What do we mean? Does everybody have a sense of humor? I would argue no. If you cannot laugh at yourself, then you do not have a sense of humor. You might still be able to laugh at others, but that's actually bullying. It's not the same thing. To be able to laugh at oneself is what gives one the ability to see irony, because it's the ludicrousness of the universe. It's that incredible contrast between this and that and you somehow in the middle of it. That's if you can't laugh at yourself, like I said, you cannot see irony, you don't have a sense of humor. AI can make jokes, but it doesn't have a sense of humor, because it can't make jokes really about itself, even though, yeah, you could tell it, make a joke about yourself, and it could, but it's doing it imitatively and not organically. And where writing comedy is concerned, those are two very different places from which comedy could spring. And one will create great comedy and the other will create generic comedy. So am I afraid of AI? Yeah, because money will end up using it because it's cheaper. And yeah, they'll sacrifice. I think that the risk isn't that it will replace storytelling. It's that the money will use AI to replace great storytelling because AI is cheaper. That's
Absolutely.
the risk of AI.
Absolutely. And maybe through that, more narratives will come and less of storytelling. But storytelling will always be there as long as perhaps human beings are there.
When I remember when the first computer generated animation started. I remember my old boss, Bob Zemeckis, when he did his North Pole movie, the North Pole Express. A wonderful experiment. The faces, at those first faces, just weren't right. They were just too weird, and that slowly got better and better and better. So yeah, computer generated faces, what animators have been able to do has gotten steadily more and more lifelike, and they've really got the animation to capture most of the, not just the human emotions, but the nuances. They've really gotten awfully good at that. But it's human beings who are programming that emotion, looking for the nuances. When we sit in a room together, virtually, sort of, but it's more if we were sitting in a real space together. There's all kinds of communication that happens between us, our faces, our bodies, all kinds of backwards and forwards. And computers can't capture that because they aren't that. They aren't animals like we are.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Ellen. Tell us a bit about your podcast. You have several podcasts.
I have
How did
multiple
you get
podcasts
to so
going.
many podcasts?
You know, I started, gosh, I used to do a show called Tales from the Crypt. And there was a fan group for the show. The fan group was called Dads from the Crypt, and they did a podcast where they would review all the episodes of Tales from the Crypt and give parenting advice, which I thought was hilarious. So they asked me if I would sit for an interview with them while they were going to review one of the episodes of Tales from the Crypt that I wrote in addition to producing. And so I said, great. And it was great fun. I really had a blast doing it. The second Tales from the Crypt feature film, the first one that we did was a great movie, a really terrific horror movie called Demon Night. And the second was this awful thing called Bordello of Blood that we did not want to make. When Jason, one of the dads from the Crypt, said, after the first episode aired, went down well, he called me back. He said, we're going to be reviewing Bordello of Blood. Would you like to sit for another interview? And I said, Jason, the story of the making of Bordello of Blood is not one single podcast. It's an entire podcast unto itself, I said, suddenly realizing what it is that I had to do. And so I set out to tell the story of the making of this awful movie that changed the course of my life. And so this first podcast was called the How Not to Make a Movie podcast. And the first season of the How Not to Make a Movie podcast was the story of the making of Bordello of Blood. Entertainment Weekly called it the best film podcast of 2022. So I thought, well, how can I stop? So I continued the podcast into a second season. I'm now in my fourth season, 160 episodes in, and it is become a every week it's an inside baseball nuts and bolts conversation with all the filmmakers I've ever worked with, just about the passion that we have for our craft and what happens when occasionally our craft turns to crap. It happens with like Bordello of Blood. After a season or two of that, a friend of mine from school, he contacted me. We had become Facebook friends, and he wanted to write a screenplay based on something that had happened to him in his life. And I dissuaded him from doing it as a movie or TV show, because when he told me what the story was, I said, first of all, they're going to make you compromise everything. No. There's no way you'll ever get this done. It'll take you years and years, incredible frustration. I said, better you should do it as a podcast. This way you can tell the whole story. Here's what it's about. In the mid-1980s, my friend worked his way through medical school as an anonymous sperm donor. Jump forward 27 years, he joins 23andMe, curious about his health genes. Never occurs to him the ramifications of contributing his DNA to a growing DNA database. That's what 23andMe is. And he lost his donor anonymity. Suddenly, 7 total strangers found Daddy, except 6 of them had no idea their actual biological father was this guy, a sperm donor. And the 7th, she had been aware. Now, keep in mind, these are people, adults, 27, 28-year-old people. The 7th, a young woman, had known for about a year that she was a donor conceived, and she had been looking for him. And that relationship turned weird. Hal is what I call him. He had become a successful radiologist. He had married a woman and helped raise her son from a previous marriage. So he'd never, ever raised a biological child of his own. And suddenly he had this family of 7 biological children. He did not raise them, but he wanted to have a relationship with them. He was really excited to have that this family, these people related to him, his family, suddenly he found out, he knew that they existed, and he wanted to have a relationship with them, but it was the relationship with the seventh that just damned everything. The podcast is a 7-episode series called The Donor, a DNA Horror Story. Absolutely true story. It's about Hal and his relationship with these 7 donor kids and how it impacted his life. While I was doing that, I suddenly thought, my gosh, I love telling stories in this medium. One of the people who I used, who very kindly gave me background information on the donor conceived world, was a woman named Donna Hall. And when Donna told me her story, I thought, oh my God, this is a podcast unto itself. And Donna, well, that's another podcast that I just dropped. It's called The Hall Closet. Donna grew up it's a true crime podcast like you've never heard it. Donna grew up in a lower tier crime family outside of Philadelphia in the 80s and 90s. They weren't the Corleones from The Godfather, but they made national headlines just the same. Donna's mom, Phyllis, might just be the worst mom ever. She made national headlines as the Home Alone mom from Bucks County. She spent 6 months in prison for child abandonment. Donna's stepfather, John Hall, was the Philadelphia Police Department's favorite snitch. He put more than 25 people behind bars on confessions that were entirely concocted by John to help deal with his own legal issues. He was trying to get his own time reduced. Among the people that he put in prison on this nonsense was his own stepson, Herb, on a murder charge for 18 months. He had nothing to do with it. And he put a man named Walter Ogrod on death row for 24 years for a murder Walter had nothing to do with. And Donna tells the story of what it was like growing up inside this crime family, where really it was hellacious. But she's an amazing storyteller. She's not an ounce of self-pity. It's not just the true crime. This is her story is a search for safety and empowerment. And that's what makes her story so compelling and so incredibly listenable. My little company is called Costard and Touchstone Productions. It's Costard and Touchstone are 2 Shakespearean clowns, 2 Shakespearean wise fools who speak truth to power in various Shakespearean plays. I in my very brief acting career, I played those 2 characters, Costard and Touchstone. They speak truth to power, and so my little company, we speak truth to power. But more importantly, our mission is to make the world a better place through storytelling. That's our mission. And I think The Donor does that. I think Hall Closet does that. I think all the other podcasts, there are 10 more podcasts that are coming down the pike, coming at me very quickly. Yeah, the goal is to make the world a better place through storytelling. I would even say, AJ, that your podcast and this very conversation are making the world a better place through storytelling. So right on, brother.
Right on. Absolutely. The world is a better better place with better storytelling, less of narratives, but better stories about whoever it is, but true stories, real stories, stories that can help people understand. As you said about the thing that it was a whole thing about looking for safety, everybody looks for safety in terms of either their emotions, understanding their emotions better, understanding the world better, understanding the biggest storyteller better about their own stories. So
Here,
there's
here.
so much to understand about stories, and I'm sure a lot of people would want to connect with you, learn more about your story and the stories that you are telling through several of your podcasts. What's the best way for them to do so, Ellen?
They can come to the how not to make a movie.com. Those are separated by dashes, alas, but that's one of the podcasts. The donor podcast.com or the hall closet podcast.com are those three places, and you'll be able to find your way to me. I'm kind of layered in there, and I'm slowly building the Costard and Touchstone website. Well, that should be ready shortly, and that will be where you could find all of our podcasts in one place. Of course, we're available anywhere where you find listen to podcasts. We're like a virus. We're everywhere. There's no escaping us.
Absolutely. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, AJ. Pleasure has been mine.